Hey, this is Aaron Price, CEO of TechUnited New Jersey, back for another Ask Member Anything. Today with Gaurav, the CEO and founder of Mammoth Analytics, mammoth.io. Thanks for joining us. Really excited to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here, Aaron.
So you're actually joining us from pretty far away right now. Tell people where you are.
Yeah, so I'm in London and experiencing the pandemic here.
How's pandemic life in London going right now?
Yeah, recently there was another sort of another level of lockdown they just introduced. So it's just going through. Every week it changes, so it's hard to really pin down on what direction it's heading.
Yeah. Well, we're going to bounce around some of the story here, but let's start with telling people what is Mammoth Analytics.
Yeah, so Mammoth is a data management platform, and we make data accessible and exciting and fun to everyone, including the non-technical people.
Are you saying that data can be exciting and fun? Is that what you're suggesting here? Because that's a high bar. If that's what you're selling, that's a high bar.
Yeah, that is, and our customers are surprised, and we're essentially we realize that just getting insights on data, there's a lot of frictions and a lot of barriers. And our mission and our goal is just to remove all those barriers and just give people a faster path to insights.
So explain to me, and by the way, Ben Novak, nice to see you. If anybody doesn't know Ben, he's on our board, has lots of great hobbies. I'm glad that you're joining with us, Ben. Good to see you. Like the emoji. Data, obviously a very hot topic for several years now. Can you share with people how does Mammoth integrate with their business and the kinds of insights that they could get from the product?
Sure. So in today's world, Excel is the incumbent, and Excel and other spreadsheets, Google spreadsheets, they're great, and I use it all the time. But Excel was sort of built in the 80s and is designed for data pretty much in the 80s, 90s. In today's world, when you do have sort of larger data sets that Excel can't handle, you have two options. One is to learn how to code or hire a coder. Those are the two options today when your data does not fit into Excel. We provide a third option. It's a better option. It's a code-free environment that just allows people to have a direct sort of a pathway to getting insights from their data without relying on IT or other professionals. And it's not necessarily about the cost or the money. It's just this concept of, you don't know what you don't know with your data. And if you have a lot of barriers in trying to get to the answers, then a lot of opportunities are left on the table. And we help with just avoiding that path of not getting insights, basically.
Can you share a use case, a practical use case of how someone's used the product and the sort of insight they were able to get out of what they learned?
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole bunch actually of examples, but one of the ones that come to mind is that this one customer, they run an educational service. They have an app. People log into their app. They have a website. They have videos that they serve. They have coaching sessions. And they're on a high growth trajectory. Management wants to know how engaged their audience is. And to actually measure engagement, you have to kind of look at each one of those different channels. And outside of that, they have other things like webinars and emails that they send out that are managed by other vendors. And to look at the data in a holistic way, it's a fairly convoluted process. And it's not, the current way of doing it without Mammoth. It's just a lot of manual labor. We just help streamline that process. We basically reduced 10 days a month into 10 minutes.
So are you saying that, I mean, we have that, that's a pain point for us, where we use ConvertKit for emails. We go live in a variety with other tools. This happens to be StreamYard. We're tracking all these things. It's very manual.
Yep.
So are you suggesting that we could potentially, is Mammoth set up in a way that we could tie in through what I'm assuming are APIs or other integrations with the tools that we use
Yep.
to create a dashboard to start to see, here's how many views this got, here's how many likes this got, here was the reach of these things. So it was a less manual process. Is that what you just described?
That is sort of, to be honest, the dashboard part is really easy. A lot of companies do that. But there's this concept of garbage in, garbage out, where typically your data is never in the most perfect format. And if you just convert your imperfect data into a dashboard, it's less trustworthy, and it's not exact. It doesn't give you the right information. So to go from your garbage data into a clean and insightful dashboard, today most of the time is spent not in creating the visualization, but it's spent in cleaning up the data and preparing the data. That data preparation time, it's typically 80% of the work, 80 to 90% of the work. We reduce that to 5%, basically, and that's how we make things a bit more efficient.
How do you do that?
So there are a couple of different problems today that we're solving. So one problem is it's a very fragmented world. So if you think of the journey of data, it's never just a click of a button to get from raw data to insights. It's you have to bring the data together. You have to store it somewhere. You have to clean it up. After the cleanup, then there's the analysis. And then once you have the analysis done, then you visualize it. And all these different steps require different technologies. And all these different technologies have a high bar, sort of a high barrier to entry. And we do two things. One is we have one platform that does all of this, and we lower the bar on who can do this. So there's efficiency on two fronts. Less skill required and less technologies to use.
That's super interesting. So there are some very big companies doing things like this. There's a company, obviously, Palantir,
Yep.
does more consulting work. There's another company called Enigma. There's a host of these. And
Yep.
then even on the database side, I was reminded a bit of Airtable, though this sounds a little bit more supercharged. But some of those things came up. So how do you stand out? Like, what's the one thing you find resonates with customers as you talk to them about the solution?
Yeah. So the world of data preparation that's growing. I mean, it's an industry term. It's not really something that's known to the layperson. But data preparation is a field that's covered really well by a lot of big companies, but their target audience is a highly technical user. We're the only ones, pretty much in the world, that focuses, that shifts that burden of data preparation to a non-technical person. Now, the reason for that is typically the domain expert is a non-technical person. And whether you're a geneticist or someone in finance, there's a high likelihood you don't know how to code or write in SQL. And so we shift that burden over to them, and we lower the bar on how it's done, basically.
How easy, the onboarding challenge, the switching costs, for those who are listening and are interested in trying this, how difficult is it to try?
Yeah, so it's really easy. Just going back a little bit, it's a pretty grand vision, and part of the startup journey that we've gone through, we've kind of failed a couple of times before getting to where we wanted to, before getting to this stage, and we wanted to make this as accessible as possible, have it basically really. Not that expensive, and just the onboarding, we wanted it to be as seamless as possible. All these things it takes a while to get to that, and so we are the easiest in the market. It requires, if you're proficient with Excel, this is easier to use. Our product is easier to use. but there's so many different pathways and different challenges that customers have. We don't have the how-to videos and things like that yet. So what we do is we come in as a consultant in the beginning. We provide half an hour to 1 hour to potentially a couple of days worth of assisted model, and then we kind of let it be, and we let the customer sort of deal with it after that. And that model seems to be working right now. Over time, where we're heading with this is we're lowering that learning curve, and we're going to make it more accessible to everyone.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your story in getting here. So
Sure.
You grew up in India, right?
Yep.
And then tell us, what brought you to the U.S. What's brought you to London? I want to learn a little bit more about how you got into starting Mammoth.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in India. Did my up to high school there. Went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh for college. It was just a trajectory I was going at. I didn't know exactly where I was heading, but I got a good offer from a company in San Francisco. I was basically, I started off as a software engineer in a large ad agency in San Francisco, and we had some big clients. We had like Microsoft and Nike and Sony, and for a while it was really fun projects. I would fly out to Redmond quite a bit. We'd do some interesting tech work. The last couple of years, it got quite challenging with this whole world of data, just the explosion of data. So Nike, for example, would launch a brand new shoe. They'd run a campaign, let's say a $10 million campaign. The agency is responsible for that campaign. And Nike wants to know from the agency, hey, what's my ROI on the $5 or $10 million spent? And that was increasingly a data problem. You have data sitting on Facebook and Google and a bunch of other places. And the essence of the problem was the marketers and the finance folks and the strategists, they knew what questions to ask. They knew what they wanted to do with the data, but they didn't know how. They would hand it over to my team, which is the engineering team. We knew how. We didn't know why and what we were doing. So there was a lot of back and forth, and it just created a whole host of inefficiencies. And I started with this idea of wanting to just get IT out of the equation and just empower the analysts and the business folks with the right set of tools. When I started this journey, it was for the agency world, but the more I looked into it, this problem of some people having the questions, but then another set of people having the skill set to answer those questions, that whole model is endemic in pretty much every industry. We have a client in biotech, and these are geneticists. They're molecular biologists. They're not data scientists. But for them to ask basic questions on the data that they're getting, clinical data and things like that, they have to rely on someone else. And that whole process is not being really addressed by anyone. When you do have companies like Palantir and other companies like Fivetran or even the world where Google and Microsoft are heading, they're empowering the IT folks. They're not really empowering the domain experts.
Yeah.
So that's a journey. And when I started the company, I failed a couple of times before getting some level of success. And that failure, basically, there's a lot of scar tissue that I have on, it's nothing to do with the actual company itself, but just starting a company is hard. It's hard work. You've been through that journey before, it seems.
I have, yeah. I call it the fail way to success. I don't, it's not really a failure. It's just the next step. But what I'm curious, because this is where the good stuff is. What went wrong?
Yeah, I think, everyone has different personalities on this. I was overconfident, I think. And I think it might've been ego and overconfidence. And you kind of just assume you can do it all. You just need a couple of minions to run the show while you direct. But in reality, what you really need, and I learned this the hard way, is an A++ team. And you want someone better than you in pretty much every field possible. And as a CEO and founder, what I've learned is the hardest job is getting the right team together. And then if you have that, then it's a great setup.
Yeah.
But I think the problem before was more of the blind leading the blind, where I didn't really have domain expertise in a lot of different areas. I would just make a lot of assumptions, and we had a limited budget, so it was a bootstrapped company. So I hired a bunch of really smart people, but junior folks who didn't have experience, and I didn't have experience either. So then that doesn't lead to the right sort of situation. And there are a lot of things along the way. I mean, also location. San Francisco is an interesting location. It's great for startups that are well funded. But if you want to grow a team with some really talented folks who have job offers from Google and Apple and all the heavily funded companies, you need a deep pocket there. So that was another.
Yeah. So what did bring you to London?
Yeah. So that was one reason. I just, because it was a bootstrapped company, it was just not. It wasn't promising. Just this ability to grow a team there in San Francisco, especially. The other is San Francisco serves clients typically, or the typical clients in that geography are tech companies. If I wanted to talk to someone in finance, that's New York. If it's government, that's DC. And at that stage in our company, we weren't really sure. We were in a discovery stage of who the perfect client would be. And so London seemed to be the right place where you could just throw darts at different industries in one city and see which ones stick. And that proved to be true. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this journey that I've been through to everyone. It's sort of a contextual and situational kind of a thing. We just happened to want to experiment with various industries. London offered that. We wanted to hire a really great talent, but not spend crazy amounts of money. London offered that. So.
Yeah. Did you have any big break moments? Did you feel like there was a moment where things started to click and you thought, all right, this is really going to work?
Yeah, we've had a bunch of those. Every time a client is able to use our product without our help and discover things that they just can't do otherwise, and they mention that to us. I mean, that's and that's happened a bunch of times, and that you're onto the right thing, and it's hard. We know that it's hard for anyone else to replicate what we're doing, because we've whatever we've built based on a lot of experience and a lot of sort of failures, and so it's not easy for anyone else to just copy what we do, because there's a lot behind the scenes of how we do certain things. And for clients to appreciate that is always something that is great.
What is your, I'm Jewish. There's a certain family pressure to take a certain career path that I did not take. I understand from other Indian friends that there's similar pressure to take a more traditional career path. And you talk about Carnegie Mellon and then taking a software engineer job, and then you go out and start your own thing. I'm curious what your family thought of this whole situation.
Yeah, I think even within the Indian sort of society, there's a whole variety and there's a whole spectrum of types of families. I just happened to grow up in a really supportive family, and I came from a relatively well-to-do sort of family, where, in the sense that I wasn't really struggling to survive, and I think that's good and bad. I think when you are struggling, and we struggled the last couple of years before we had a couple of breakthrough moments within Mammoth. Those struggles actually help you think through certain things that you just wouldn't have if you were in a comfort zone. but just having it in your mind a bit of safety net and having the ability to experiment, that's also a value. So I came from, I have my background sort of lends itself to both worlds, where there was a bit of comfort zone, but at some point the money ran out, and it was the first time I experienced not having much money for the company to survive, and we had a bunch of employees, and what happens when you're pushed up against a wall, what decisions you have to make is very different, and but it's something that you appreciate and learn.
That kind of pressure cooker environment does sort of force a certain outcome and a skill set. It's kind of like whether you like it or not. Last year at our, you just experienced our digital Propelify experience.
Yep.
The in-person event last year. There are so many things that, and they're just parallels to entrepreneurship, but the things that seem like insurmountable problems that would come up, where one was just weather was not on our side last year, but also we had vendor problems and issues with the city and things that I think a lot of people would have been like, I think I'm good. And it just always reminded me of every other business I've been a part of, where it's like you hit these hurdles and you have to decide you're either going to push through or call it a day. And I think the big difference is having that absolute determination to be like, doesn't matter what comes my way, I'm going to figure this out.
There's that, Aaron, and there's also this concept of really filtering down into the core things you need to do without worrying about other things. Yeah, and it was interesting. I was, do you know Daniel Kahneman? He's a psychologist, a behavioral.
Don't, but I usually love those kinds of people. I'm curious where you're going. He's a famous guy and talks about this concept of fast. He wrote this book. I'm forgetting. I'm losing track of the name here, but there was this one talk where he mentioned this concept of happiness versus misery, and the question is: are you trying to, as a project or as a mission, are you trying to increase happiness, or are you trying to reduce misery? And sometimes, these are blurred lines. You can go either ways, or one product can offer both. But sometimes it's very distinct. If you're offering some wellness program to your employees, that's like a happiness project. But if you're helping refugees get out of their misery, then that's a misery project, right? And so it was, a couple of things around that. One is, it's easier, apparently, to measure misery. It's easier to, they had some experiment where they have money you take away, and every time you take away money, then it increases the level of misery. But then at some point, your happiness stops. Your happiness is the flat line after a certain point of money. Right? So the point is, it's easier to measure misery. It's a better thing to do. And I try to apply that to the startup world, at least in my world, specifically the go-to-market strategy. So we have a product that if you offer to someone who's living a normal life and dealing with data, and you give them Mammoth Analytics, and their life will be better. Like we're quite confident about that. But they're living normally. Give them Mammoth, they're happier. But then there are others who are really struggling with data. They're like in the trenches, just dealing with a lot of stuff. And if you give them Mammoth, it's a real painkiller. It's like, wow, that's amazing what you can do. And so it helped us basically figure out a go-to-market. We want to focus on the misery group, right? And so the question was like, how do we identify a profile that is really struggling with data, and how do you provide that painkiller experience versus a vitamin sort of a solution, I was just going to use that example that it reminded me of a friend of mine, David Kidder, is a serial tech entrepreneur, wrote a book about where he interviewed big name startup founders about their success and looked for the common traits that they tend to exhibit, and not necessarily personality traits, but of the companies. And one of the things you just talked about was about painkillers over vitamins.
Yeah.
Have something that really solves a pain that's the path to the $1 billion value. It doesn't have to be financial valuation, but just for ease, right? Over just the nice to have vitamins for that same exact reason. He also talks about a variety of other things like being 10x better than the competition, which I'm a big believer in. You know, you can't just have one feature that's a little bit better, but if the entire experience is 10x better, you can make a real big impact. You know, what would be your biggest advice to someone who is thinking about starting a company? You've talked about team, you talked about focus, pain points. There's a variety of, there's a lot of good nuggets of wisdom in here. For someone who might be watching this thinking of starting their own business, who maybe has had a more corporate career path, what advice would you give someone like that?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that, but just really quick, it's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman. That's what I was trying to remember. So that's the happiness misery context. But just going back to or addressing your question, what I've noticed is a lot of people start companies because they think it's time to do that, or it's something that they want to do at some point in their life, so they just embark on starting a company without really a meaningful idea. And sometimes it's the impetus is to start a company, and the ideas are very sort of in its early stages that are not really well thought through. And what I've noticed for most successful companies, it comes out of experience. If you've kind of lived in the trenches, and if you've experienced the problem firsthand, and most people go through some problems, some inefficiencies in the world that they have dealt with. I think that's a better pathway than just starting a company for the sake of starting a company.
I would totally agree with that. I've in my own history, I had a company that was opportunistic because I thought there was a big market that I could address. It was not a personal, it wasn't my own unique expertise that I brought to the table. And I think one of the reasons it plateaued was because it was not a passion point. I didn't bring a unique value prop. I just saw it as opportunistic. So I fully with you on that point. I like to ask this closing personal question just because I think it's interesting. What do you have on your screen background on your phone? What picture do you have there?
Oh, it's interesting. Just yesterday I just picked an Apple stock photo. I have an iPhone, and it was just an experiment. My battery is running low pretty easily, and I thought it might be something to do with the background image and the brightness and things like that. So it's just an experiment to see if a stock image helps with battery efficiency.
I would love to find out if you find that to be true. But this is why I asked the question, because I think it's there's like a subtle personality, cues in those things, right? Like software engineer, not customizing the background, which nothing wrong with that. But I love the answer. I would love to find out if in fact it does help, because I think a lot of people watching would love to know the answer to that. Anyway, I really appreciate you joining us, especially from London, being part of the community. What more? Last question is, what else could this community, the TechUnited New Jersey community, do to help you?
Listen, our goal is, it's not about money. We're not trying to charge a lot for what we do. It does cost money to use our product, which is Mammoth Analytics, but we are the really inexpensive compared to anyone else. But there's an ultimate mission here. The goal is to remove all the inefficiencies, and that's where this comes from. It's a purpose-driven company. We think that there's better time spent than dealing with data inefficiencies, cleaning up data, consolidating, and things like that. At Mammoth, what we do is just make that dead simple, and what we ultimately do is give people back time to do other things. We have a bunch of cases where it's really transformed people's lives, and we'd love to be able to just have members of your community, just if they are struggling with data, talk to us, and we'd we'd be happy to help out. And even if for nonprofits, for students, we offer for free. For any other company, it's all a sort of a context-based thing. So the company is called Mammoth Analytics. The website is mammoth.io. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. We really appreciate you guys being members, being part of the community. I know John Keegan's been very involved here on this side of the pond, so to speak. And people, reach out to John, check out mammoth.io. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks,
Learned
Aaron.
a lot. Really interesting conversation. We usually end, if I don't know if you saw it during Propellify. I'm a big fan of the high fives. On the count of three, you can high five your camera. 1, 2, 3, boom. Our furthest potential. We had a South Korean high five over Propellify, but this is up there among the furthest. Really great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Good to meet you, Aaron. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.